the situation around Iran is entering a far more dangerous phase, and the latest signals from Washington suggest that the current ceasefire may now exist more on paper than in practice. While much of the world is still trying to assess the last round of exchanges, officials in the United States appear to be preparing for the possibility of a new and broader stage of war. At the White House, President Donald Trump showed open frustration when he dismissed Tehran's latest peace proposal as worthless. What drew immediate attention was not only the language he used, but the fact that he appeared willing to reject the proposal before fully engaging with it. That reaction quickly intensified speculation that Washington may be preparing to move back toward a full combat footing. The most closely watched development came from reporting confirmed by NBC News. According to that reporting, the Pentagon has been actively discussing changing the name of the anti-Iran operation from Operation Epic Fury to Operation SlashHammer. In military and political terms, that kind of change is rarely just cosmetic. The shift matters because a new operation name can carry legal and procedural consequences. It may give the administration room to restart the 60-day clock under the War Powers Framework, creating more space for President Trump to expand military action before facing immediate pressure from Congress. Put simply, Washington may be building a legal pathway for escalation before the next crisis point arrives. That is why the name itself has drawn so much attention. Epic Fury suggested large-scale anger and force, but SlashHammer conveys something more direct and more destructive, the image of a crushing strike with little restraint. For military analysts, that raises a larger question about whether the Pentagon is not just preparing a message, but preparing a new target structure. At the same time, Iran has not been standing still. Behind the diplomatic exchanges, the naval arm of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has issued signals that many observers consider extremely serious for the global maritime system. Iranian officials have indicated that the operational zone around the Strait of Hormuz is being widened beyond the narrow choke point that traditionally defines the crisis map. An Iranian rear admiral stated on the 12th that Tehran had expanded the maritime area it considers part of the active battlefield. Earlier restrictions focused on a bottleneck roughly 39 kilometers wide. Now, according to the statement, Iran is treating a much broader arc stretching from Jask to Siri Island as a combat zone, extending hundreds of kilometers across a strategically critical corridor. That change has immediate global implications. Roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply still moves through or around this region, and any military collision there could trigger an immediate shock in global energy markets. Even a limited exchange could affect shipping, insurance, tanker routes, fuel costs, and broader economic confidence. This is one reason some military observers believe Operation SlashHammer may already exist as more than a concept. If Washington concludes that maritime harassment, missile threats, and drone activity are continuing under the cover of a nominal ceasefire, then a revised operation may be tied to a finished or nearly finished list of targets inside the Pentagon. The concern is not just escalation, but escalation with prepared options already on the table. After Operation Epic Fury reportedly damaged significant portions of Iran's traditional naval capacity, Tehran's remaining strength at sea is seen primarily in its so-called swarm fleet. That includes small armed speedboats designed for high-speed, unpredictable movement in constrained waters. If a new American operation is activated, analysts believe the next phase may go beyond small craft and focus on command systems, missile bases, logistics centers, and the institutional power structure of the Revolutionary Guard. That possibility is what makes the current moment so tense. When a war begins to change its name, it may also be preparing to change its level of destruction. And that is precisely why military planners across the region are watching not only the rhetoric, but the force posture behind it. The military buildup around the Middle East is another source of concern. According to several defense reports, the current American presence may now be larger than it was at the beginning of Operation Epic Fury. This no longer looks like a limited deterrent posture alone. It increasingly resembles the assembly of a force package designed to support wider conflict if ordered. A Marine Expeditionary Unit has reportedly been moved into the region. 2 carrier strike groups are operating around the Gulf, and in the skies near Iran, large numbers of American aircraft are being deployed in strategic patterns. Among them are some of the most capable platforms in the United States inventory, including F-35 aircraft, A-10 aircraft, and F-16CJ fighters. What matters here is not only the number of aircraft, but the roles they may be playing. Some of these squadrons are not simply flying patrols or preparing for ordinary strike missions. Their task may include acting as tactical bait, pushing into contested airspace to force Iranian air defenses to reveal themselves. That is one of the oldest and most dangerous methods in modern air warfare. Aircraft move close enough to provoke a radar activation or a missile launch, and the moment that signal appears, electronic intelligence platforms record the emissions and pass the data to strike aircraft, command networks, or electronic warfare crews. In practical terms, the message to the opposing side becomes brutally simple. Turn on your radar, and you may immediately expose your position. The pilots assigned to this kind of mission operate close to the boundary between pressure and lethal risk. They are used not just as combat platforms, but as tools for shaping the enemy's electronic battlefield. That is why some experts now describe the region as being in a false ceasefire, one in which the language of de-escalation remains in public, but the mechanics of war continue in the air and at sea. Iran, over the past week, has also faced accusations of involvement in attacks directed at the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait. More notably, there are indications that the UAE may have begun limited responses of its own. If that reading is correct, the regional balance is shifting, because Gulf states that once preferred distance may now be moving toward more direct engagement. That matters because the central question is no longer whether Tehran wants sanctions relief, reduced isolation, and continued uranium enrichment. It is whether the time created by diplomacy is being used for negotiation, or for military repositioning. If missiles continue to move, while ceasefire language remains in place, Washington is likely to conclude that Iran is using diplomacy to buy time for a larger objective. By this stage, the confrontation has evolved into a form of soft war. There are fewer scenes of large-scale bombardment than in the initial phase, but the region remains stretched to its limit. In that atmosphere, many analysts believe Operation SlashHammer may be the Pentagon's prepared answer for the next round if the current balance breaks down. Another unexpected player has emerged in the diplomatic space: Pakistan. Islamabad has reportedly taken on a role in organizing the highest-level dialogue between the United States and Iran since 1979. On the surface, that positions Pakistan as a key mediator, but it also revives old questions about trust and strategic ambiguity. Those doubts come from history that still carries weight. Osama bin Laden lived in Pakistan for years before the United States launched the secret operation that killed him, and Washington did not fully trust Pakistani institutions with advance warning of that raid. Because of that background, any sudden expansion of Pakistan's diplomatic role in a crisis involving Iran is likely to invite close scrutiny. That scrutiny has increased because satellite imagery has reportedly identified the presence of an Iranian electronic intelligence aircraft on Pakistani soil. The aircraft in question was described as an RC-130 variant, a highly sensitive surveillance platform derived from an older American airframe acquired by Iran before the Islamic Revolution. Its purpose is not routine transport, but signals collection, military eavesdropping, radar analysis, and strategic intelligence gathering. Reports indicate that the aircraft has been observed at an airbase near Islamabad, only about 10 kilometers from the Pakistani capital. That detail has immediately raised the question of whether Pakistan is doing more than mediating. Analysts are now asking whether Islamabad may be quietly helping Iran preserve part of its electronic intelligence capacity during a period when those assets could become targets. No definitive public proof has been offered that Pakistan is directly assisting Iranian military operations, but timing matters in crisis analysis, and the timing here is difficult to ignore. An Iranian intelligence aircraft appearing under Pakistani protection, just as Washington debates a broader military option, is exactly the kind of development that attracts serious international attention. Meanwhile, the diplomatic path appears increasingly frozen. The ceasefire may still exist formally, but after President Trump's hard line at the White House, momentum toward meaningful compromise looks weak. Behind the scenes, the Pentagon is reportedly drafting multiple war scenarios for what comes next. Iran, for its part, continues to insist that it is holding firm, and in some accounts even prevailing. But Tehran's definition of victory seems very different from the one used by outside observers. A state can project resilience in public while absorbing serious internal damage in private. And that may be what is happening now. Reports cited in the transcript suggest that Iran's economy is losing roughly $500 million per day because of blockade, pressure, and energy disruption. That is an extraordinary rate of damage for any system to sustain. It hits not only ordinary economic activity, but also the networks of power, patronage, and security that help the state function. Militarily, Iran's traditional naval strength is also believed to have been significantly eroded. What remains most visible is its fleet of hundreds of armed past boats and its ability to threaten disruption in the Strait of Hormuz. Some estimates in the transcript place that potential swarm force at between 500 and 1,000 high-speed attack craft. No serious military planner dismisses that threat. A cornered opponent can be more dangerous, not less dangerous, because it becomes more willing to accept risk. If Operation SlashHammer truly begins, the United States may be forced to deal not with a conventional navy in open water battle, but with an irregular, dispersed, highly aggressive set of maritime tactics across the Gulf. A useful way to understand the Iranian posture is to look at the internal structure of its military power. After recent damage to the regular navy, Tehran appears to be shifting more of the burden to the naval arm of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. That force is widely seen as ideologically loyal to the ruling clerical system and better aligned with asymmetric warfare. The Revolutionary Guard exists in part because Iran's leadership never fully trusted the regular military on its own. Over time, this produced overlapping chains of force and influence, with periodic tension between the traditional armed forces and the Revolutionary Guard in a moment of potential total war. That distinction matters because the Guard is the institution most likely to be entrusted with politically decisive missions. Its maritime doctrine has long centered on asymmetry. Iran understands that it cannot match American carrier groups in a conventional naval contest. Instead, it tries to turn narrow waters into a chaotic, crowded, and dangerous environment using speed, surprise, dispersed launch points, and the constant threat of mines, drones, missiles, and explosive boats. Some of those small vessels have previously approached United States warships at distances that cause significant concern. American planners also worry that some may be packed with explosives or converted into remotely controlled suicide craft. In the confined geography of the Strait of Hormuz, only a few such boats slipping through defensive layers could create outsized disruption. This is why the United States Navy, the Air Force, the Marine Corps, and other American forces in the Gulf remain on high alert for sworn tactics. The issue is not just firepower. It is the complexity of defending large, high-value ships in a narrow maritime space where civilian traffic, military movement, and rapid attack can merge in seconds. A senior political figure in the Guard's naval structure reportedly confirmed on the 12th that Iran is widening the scope of its maritime activity. That announcement suggests Tehran is not trying to narrow the conflict. It is preparing for the possibility of a larger confrontation and perhaps trying to shape the battlefield before one begins. There's another problem for any outside military response. Many Iranian ports are dual-use facilities, serving both civilian and military functions. That makes target identification more difficult and raises the risk that any future campaign against coastal infrastructure could carry broader economic and political consequences. For that reason, some experts believe that if Operation SlashHammer is activated, it may not begin with isolated tactical strikes alone. It could become a system-wide effort to dismantle Iran's coastal military infrastructure at speed, hitting launch sites, command nodes, storage areas, and logistical arteries in rapid sequence. The aim would be to break the swarm threat before it can produce a symbolic success. And symbolism matters greatly in this war. From Iran's perspective, the ideal moment would be a visible, globally shocking strike on a major American vessel, especially a carrier or destroyer. Even one successful anti-ship missile hit, if achieved, could be presented by Tehran as a strategic victory far larger than its immediate military value. The missile often mentioned in this context is the Noor anti-ship system, itself linked to Chinese-derived technology. Combined with swarm boats and coastal drone operations, Such a strike would fit Iran's preferred model of asymmetric warfare. It would aim to change psychology more than geography, proving vulnerability rather than winning open control. Washington appears to be planning against exactly that scenario. If Operation SlashHammer moves forward, the region could see extensive bombing of Iranian coastal military networks, including hardened sites. Recent images released by United States Central Command showing a B-1 bomber in training are significant because the platform is well suited to carrying the GBU-72 bunker-penetrating bomb. The GBU-72, weighing around 2.2 tons, is not a general-purpose bomb designed for ordinary targets. It is meant to drive into hardened structures before detonating, making it especially relevant for underground command, facilities, reinforced storage areas, and protected military nodes. F-15 Strike Eagle aircraft can also carry this type of weapon, which adds flexibility to American planning. Analysts believe a priority target set would likely include underground drone networks, buried missile support facilities, and command bunkers near the coast. Ironically, by widening its own declared maritime control zone, Iran may have expanded the number of assets and areas the United States can justify targeting in a future operation. A broader Iranian military footprint can become a broader American strike map. The international environment is also changing around this conflict. France is reportedly preparing to place Tiger attack helicopters aboard frigates near the Strait of Hormuz after tests against Iranian drones in the UAE showed strong results. Earlier this year, according to French naval statements, the helicopter's 30mm cannon and rocket systems performed effectively against slow, low-profile drone targets. Paris is still seen as entering the crisis later than some of its allies, but the move is meaningful. It suggests that European governments are beginning to view Iran less as a difficult interlocutor and more as a direct security concern. That does not mean Europe wants war, but it does mean Europe is preparing more visibly for the risks of one. At the same time, another development is unfolding on the global stage. President Trump has traveled to Beijing for a 36-hour summit with President Xi Jinping, accompanied by several prominent American figures from technology and finance, including Elon Musk, Tim Cook, Larry Fink, and a senior Boeing executive identified in the transcript as Kelly Berg. The agenda reportedly includes trade, export controls, artificial intelligence, Taiwan, and the war involving Iran. That summit matters because one of Washington's key concerns is whether China would continue assisting Iran if open conflict resumes. The forms of support causing the most concern are not necessarily troops or direct intervention, but enabling technologies such as electro-optical seekers, high-resolution satellite imagery, and battlefield surveillance capabilities that could improve Iranian targeting. Yet the American side also enters the meeting with pressure points of its own. Washington has just approved a weapons package for Taiwan worth around $25 billion, a move certain to anger Beijing. So even if both sides have incentives to reduce confrontation, the atmosphere around the summit is likely to be tense. This is the contradiction at the center of the larger geopolitical picture. The United States still relies heavily on supply chains connected to China, while Beijing does not want to remain structurally dependent on Washington. If there are cracks, In the old strategic balance, the Iran war could become one of the arenas where new understandings or new rivalries are quietly shaped. Back in the military sphere, one of the most striking signs of preparation involves long-range bunker-penetrating weapons. Boeing has reportedly received a contract worth more than $100 million to add more massive ordnance penetrator bombs to the American inventory. This weapon, weighing roughly 13.6 tons, is carried by the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. The relevance of that bomb is substantial. It was reportedly used during Operation Midnight Hammer in June of 2025 against fortified Iranian nuclear-related facilities. Now, with discussion of Operation SlashHammer gaining attention, the accelerated procurement of additional penetrators has fueled suspicion that the Pentagon may be preparing for a deeper strategic bombing campaign. The American message appears straightforward. Washington believes Iran may still be hiding drones, ballistic missiles, command centers, and possibly nuclear-related assets inside a network of hardened underground facilities. If escalation continues, those installations may move onto the priority strike list. Iran, however, has not left itself without defensive measures. Tehran is believed to have constructed numerous decoy bunkers across the country in order to confuse American surveillance and waste high-value munitions. This is a dangerous strategy of attrition because each major penetrator is expensive, complex to produce, and not something any military wants to spend on empty concrete. That creates a classic problem of modern warfare. The stronger side may possess more powerful weapons, but the weaker side can still manipulate the battle space by generating uncertainty. If the United States cannot easily distinguish between real missile stores, genuine nuclear sites, hidden command structures, and elaborate decoys, then the campaign becomes slower, costlier, and more politically sensitive. If Operation SlashHammer is ultimately launched, many analysts expect the opening strikes to focus on missile production sites, underground command facilities, locations tied to Iran's nuclear program, and military zones connected to the Strait of Hormuz. In the early phase, the GBU-72 would likely play a major role in smashing tactical bunkers and coastal defenses before deeper attacks by B-2 aircraft are considered. If that happens, Hormuz could become the most intensely targeted area in the Middle East since the war began. Another sign being watched closely is the presence of RC-135 aircraft over or near the region. When these electronic intelligence platforms appear in sustained patterns, it often indicates that the listening phase of a campaign is giving way to real-time target hunting. These aircraft are not ordinary reconnaissance planes. They are central nodes in the collection, processing, and relay of electronic battlefield data. An RC-135 can detect radar emissions, monitor military communications, map air defense activity, and help identify command nodes across a large theater. Similar platforms have been observed near other geopolitical flashpoints before periods of heightened American pressure. Their presence does not guarantee immediate war, but it often signals that the military wants a far clearer picture before making fast decisions. That larger picture shows a conflict being shaped not only by firepower, but by time. Iran's strategy appears increasingly focused on prolonging the crisis for as long as possible. The 5-point response proposal it submitted, including full sanctions relief, and preservation of uranium enrichment rights seems to many analysts less like a practical compromise than a bid to buy additional tweaks. More time means more than diplomacy for Tehran. It means more time without major bombing, more time to regroup remaining military assets, and more time to keep instability alive around the Strait of Hormuz. If oil prices continue to fluctuate and pressure reaches the American political system ahead of midterm elections, Tehran may hope that Washington will eventually choose restraint over escalation. That is the gamble. Iran appears to be betting that it can outlast American political patience. But there's another side to that equation. Every day of delay reportedly costs Iran around $500 million. And that drains the financial foundations of the state, even as it tries to project endurance. If Operation SlashHammer is executed, it could reflect the meaning of its name with uncomfortable accuracy. B-2 Spirit bombers would likely carry GBU-57 bunker-penetrating weapons against the hardest underground targets. B-1 bombers and F-15 aircraft could then conduct follow-on strikes with GBU-72 weapons against tactical bunkers, missile coordination hubs, and coastal command positions. In that structure, RC-135 aircraft would function as the electronic eyes of the campaign. Their task would be to locate emissions, confirm active defenses, and feed updated target data into the strike network in real time. The result would be a cycle of detection and attack designed to move much faster than Iran's ability to hide, relocate, or recover. This is why the next few days are being watched so closely. If the current trajectory continues for another 3 or 4 days without meaningful diplomatic movement, the Middle East may enter the most dangerous phase of this crisis so far. The ceasefire language may remain, but the military architecture forming around it suggests that both sides are already preparing for the possibility that the pause will not hold. At this point, the central reality is hard to avoid. The confrontation is no longer defined by a single event, a single strike, or a single statement. It is being shaped by legal maneuvering in Washington, asymmetric planning in Tehran, widening military footprints in the Gulf, intelligence activity across several countries, and the involvement of major powers far beyond the immediate battlefield. Nothing in the available information proves that a new American offensive is inevitable, but the combination of renamed operations, repositioned forces, wider Iranian maritime claims, bunker-penetrating procurement, and intensifying intelligence collection points toward a region moving closer to decision. Whether that decision leads to coercive diplomacy or to renewed war may depend on what happens next and on how much room either side still believes it has left. For now, the official ceasefire remains in place. In practice, however, the battlefield indicators suggest something more fragile and far more unstable. And when a crisis reaches the stage where the names change, the maps widen, and the bomb inventories grow, the margin for error becomes dangerously small.